Okay, so welcome back to another Sabbath School lesson. This is going to be taken from lesson number 5. This is actually extreme heat. The memory verse for this lesson is taken from Isaiah 53 and verse 10. It says, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Let's break this lesson into maybe like 3 or 4 categories. So what you're going to find in this lesson is you're going to see mainly going over the story of Abraham. This is Genesis chapter 22. And so that's going to be Abraham and basically him offering Isaac up. You're also going to see a little bit of a theme of the story of Hosea. This is going to be Hosea chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. It's not really about Hosea. It's mainly about what God is doing to the Israelites during the days of Hosea, because he's frustrated that they turned away from him. The other aspect is going to be Job chapter 1 going into the beginning of the beginning of chapter 2. It's going to be the story of Job again. We've talked about it a number of times. We're not going to spend too much time on it. But in the last is going to be actually 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 23 through 29. So that's going to be going over Paul and basically his story of hardships. So he talks about a lot of the hardships he went through and basically his mindset. So here's the main thing that we're going to kind of see here. Genesis chapter 22 is going to be talking about Abraham. And one of the main questions that is going to pop out of the story, because this is about Abraham going up to offer Isaac. So God tells him, hey, go offer your son as a sacrifice for me. And one of the main things the authors want you to kind of think about around this topic of the story is very simple. Am I hearing God correctly? Am I hearing God correctly? That's the first major question that's really being pointed out here. How do you know if you can actually hear God correctly? And if God tells you something that seems to be contrary to maybe what you previously thought, I mean, how would you really know that what God's telling you has now changed? The other thing is going to be going into Hosea chapter 2 and verse 1 through 12. And what you're going to find in the story of Hosea is the main theme of, am I going through a trial because I'm running from God? In the story of Hosea, the Israelites basically were just reckless, and they were basically being an unfaithful lover to God. And God basically was trying to basically get back with them, but at the same time, he was causing a lot of trials for them, saying that he's going to bring certain consequences because they were running from him and being unfaithful. The next is going to actually be Job, but we're not going to get into Job because we always talk about Job, and they're in the last several lessons too much. So really, we're going to fast forward to 2 Corinthians, and this is where you're going to find Paul mainly bringing up his mindset. And Paul's mindset is very simple. You go through trials so that you can comfort others. So this is 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 29. Paul is talking about going through trials to comfort other people. He's been shipwrecked a number of times. A lot of things have happened to him. So Paul is able to identify with people that go through some sort of hardship. So let's move on to our profound meditation. Some things in life seem meaningless, or like you're taking a step back. So some things in life seem to be meaningless, or like you're taking a step back. And one story that you might know, and if you don't know, maybe you've seen the huge picture of it, but it's that guy in Greek mythology called Sisyphus. And Sisyphus is really this strange character in Greek mythology that is pictured as carrying or pushing this rock up a hill. And the idea of Sisyphus is that he was basically this huge trickster who basically cheated and tried to get away from escaping death and escaping other things in life. And this guy just wasn't the best kind of guy. And so he was restricted to pushing this giant boulder up this huge hill on the borders of Hades, or somewhere in Hades. And he's always going, and he's pushing, and he's pushing. And as he gets closer and closer to the top, and he's about to finally get to his destination, the ground just can't particularly level off enough to hold his boulder. He doesn't have the strength, and next thing you know, it falls back down all the way to the bottom. And it's this strange story of him always doing what's called a meaningless task. It never seems like he's ever getting very far. He's never seeming to make progress. And in some ways, do you ever feel like maybe you're not making progress in certain things in life? Maybe your finances, or maybe with your children or relationships, or whatever it may be that you're going through, employment, but you're doing something in life and it seems like you take a couple steps forward and all of a sudden you take 5 steps backward. And it seems like you're doing eventually this meaningless task. One parallel that you kind of find here is that what happens in the story of Genesis 22 is actually Abraham is now supposed to offer up his son. And the main idea is this seems like a meaningless task. It seems like a task that is really for Abraham a step back. Because why would you actually offer up your son? Your son is a part of the promise. If you kill your son, you've taken a large step back in this whole theme of the promise for God. So in Abraham's mind, why would God tell him to take a step back in order somehow to progress the mission? And it's one of those things that we kind of struggle with and deal with, because sometimes there are things in your life that you feel like God is telling you to do at this time, but it's a step back from maybe what you think your true calling is. It's like, maybe I'm never going to get to my true calling because I feel like I'm always taking this huge step back. One thing I want you to parallel is the story of Abraham with the story of Moses. Because what's interesting is that in the midst of trying to do something that a person could seem is a step back in Abraham's mindset, offering up his son, what's interesting is that Abraham doesn't lose faith that God is going to bring about his promise. Essentially, Hebrews brings up that Abraham believed that God could even raise the dead. So he actually believed that if for some reason Isaac died, he'll just resurrect him back from the grave and continue on the mission. But this is not the case if you compare that to the story of Moses, who ended up being the prince of Egypt, but all of a sudden, after killing a person and running away as a fugitive to the wilderness, he's now in a wilderness and he does not any longer believe that God has a purpose to work through him. So compare the two stories together. Moses now is thinking he's going to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. He takes a step back to the desert. And when God later comes to get him in the desert and says, hey, go get my people, Moses says, no, I'm not the man anymore. He no longer believes that God is going to work a huge purpose through him. And the question is why? Why does Moses not believe that God is going to work a huge purpose through him anymore? But Abraham somehow still believes that God is going to work a huge purpose through him. Both of them, in a sense, seem to be taking a step back. Abraham about to offer up his son, and also Moses essentially taking a step back to the desert. But why does Abraham still believe and Moses doesn't? So here's the question for you one more time. Abraham did not lose faith that God would bring about his purpose through him, but somehow Moses did. And the question is, why? On the other hand, I'm not going to answer that for you now. I'll let you talk about that. Remember this, though. Although Moses lost faith that God would work a great purpose through him, he never lost faith that God was with him. And you shouldn't either. I'm Oswald, and this is Profound Meditation Sabbath School Summary.